if everybody's okay, what I wanted to do was just do an audio recording of this evening. So that box in the middle is the microphone. It will generally pick up okay all the way around. So there's no video recording being made. We're not on Zoom. So just doing it as an audio recording, I think, is something that we'll be able to use for some reference points, use it for notes, and also share it with some people who are unable to make it this evening. So ordinarily, Ez would be with us. Ez is the president of Barnet Multi Faith Forum. He is currently en route to Israel for his grandson's bar mitzvah. So was unable to make it this evening, which is a great pity. But as I said, we've got a really interesting mix, both on the panel, but also here amongst you guys. And so what we want to do is use this evening as a chance to hear perspectives, but also a chance to ask some questions and have a bit of a broader conversation as well. So for you also to be involved in the conversation. Celebrating Oneness. So I heard the theme and I thought, it's an interesting theme, it's an open theme, and actually it's a theme that you can also be kind of fairly controversial with, because there could be a question as to whether there is oneness. And so as a starting point for my kind of introduction, Barnet Multi Faith Forum is an organisation that reaches into different communities in the borough, has a great relationship with Barnet Council, hence we're here, and has a strong impact in different parts of the community, be it through faith or be it through aspects of our everyday life. And so oneness, from a community perspective, is something that we do see and feel in the way that people come together. And when we have events like this, it becomes quite rich in the variety of people that attend and the variety of faiths that are here. And there's a sense of oneness in a wish to kind of share, be open, to understand. As I was thinking about this idea, I kind of can see faiths in, if you imagine faiths within circles, and we've got a Christianity circle, and we've got a Judaism circle, and we've got Islam, that actually when we look at these types of events, we have the same people coming, from the same types of communities. And so I kind of in many ways see these circles as intersecting, and that there are people that fall in these intersections that want to experience and share and learn and be heard and hear, but actually, are they representative of the rest of the circle? You know, the ones that actually don't come to these events. And so it's that kind of aspect that was rushing through my mind as I was thinking about oneness. And I think it's quite a challenging task. But what I think is interesting and good is that from the panel that we've got here, we've got quite different perspectives from different communities, but there might be something that unifies all of it, that runs right the way through. And so I think it will be very good to hear what those might be and how that could work. Obviously, we are currently missing one. So we're missing Stuart. I should be taking pictures of his. Oh, here comes Stuart. So you've come in at the very opportune moment. So I've just done a general introduction. Actually, the component of the introduction I haven't done is me. So yeah, I'm the chair of Barnet Multi Faith Forum. The forum's existed now for many years in the borough. We get involved in different types of events and activities, and it has been a really interesting base to kind of learn from and to share with, and to kind of grow with. And so for me, it's developed a lot of interesting conversations, a lot of interesting insights, and a lot of understanding. Obviously, at the moment, also quite a lot of pain. and pain from different perspectives and different communities. And so that's really also the power of understanding, and the power of oneness for me is kind of being open to hear other voices and try and gather perspective and learn, and actually recognize that one of the great strengths, one of the great unifiers with faith is faith itself. And the belief in something, the power of something, is something that everybody of faith shares. And so that can be a thing that overrides other aspects of relationship. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to the panel. And I'll just do a very rough introduction because we're going to hear from you, and you can also fill in your introduction a little bit more fully. So on the far end of the table we have Neil. Neil is from the Young Barnet Foundation. We at Barnet Multi Faith Forum have been working in recent times quite closely with the Young Barnet Foundation, and we're working together to develop the Youth Forum, so the Faith Youth Forum, and so that's something that is in development at the moment. The Reverend Julie Gittos is the Area Dean for Barnet and also the Vicar for St Mary's in Hendon, and a really strong part of community and also connections with Mitzvah Day and other aspects within our borough. I'd like to welcome also Rabbi Eleanor, who is from Finchley Reformed Synagogue. And so you're very warmly welcomed here, and it'll be interesting as well to hear your perspective. And we also have Shahab from Barnet Baha'i Assembly. So again, welcome, and it'll be really good to hear your perspectives. And lastly but not least, we have Stuart, who is here from Mitzvah Day. And again, an organisation that has strong intersections with different faiths and different communities. And so what they've been asked is if you could each give a short kind of perspective on what oneness is for you, from your perspective or your experience. And is it fair of me to start at one end and work down? Is that the simplest way to do it, just as introductions? Is that? Yeah, that involves eyesight.
I'm 45. What are you talking about? Although I was saying to my wife when I turned 45, there used to be a tablet that men would have to take called Salusa 45. It was a tablet that old men took, and I went, oh my god, I think I'm that old. So like, Neil, you can respond.
I'll go for it. Yeah.
Go for it.
From the perspective of young people, I think you meant to say, Christine. Hi guys. I'm Neil. I'm from Young Barnet Foundation, and I'm really pleased to be here. And Christina gave me not only a solid 8 minutes to make sure I got across my points and things I wanted to say, but she also gave me a lean towards what we wanted to get out. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a guide down the lines of social media, its impact on children, young people, particularly in the communities, from both positive and negative. So I'm going to not necessarily steer away from the faith side, but also just look at that element of oneness and social media. I'm going to apologise. I'm going to glance down at my phone, which is where my notes are at the moment. But I think looking at sort of the concept and the idea of oneness, one of the things that I think social media has its good and bad elements about it is that, unfortunately, oneness can be described by some, although I would say incorrectly, as sameness. That actually, in order to be aligned with somebody, you need to be the same as somebody, the same ideas, the same views, the same thoughts, which causes that separation, that anxiety, and particularly in young people, that is a big challenge. Them trying to fit in, to feel like they have to be the same as their peers, they have to be the same as others, or have the same viewpoints, have to like the same bands, or like the same music, go on the same platforms, etc. But that's not what oneness is, in my opinion. Oneness is that golden thread that I think Dave was alluding to before, which is probably what's going to come out of this panel, is that in the enjoyment of being around others from their unique perspectives and accepting the uniqueness of one another. It's not the oneness of sameness, it's the oneness of uniqueness, the way I would see it. And that is a valued thing that we need to look at. Our youth and our young people need the space in which to do that. They need a sense of feeling valued. They need a sense of feeling connected. And I don't mean online connected, although that is an element of it, but a group of young people who are disconnected from their communities, regardless of whether it's religion, it could be just in their spaces, their homes, they are going to separate, they are going to feel disengaged, and that's when we find a disengaged youth with whichever area we're in. We need to create those spaces. And I know amongst the faiths that are in the room, we do our best to create those spaces, whether it be the buildings and having a safe space there, or even just ears to listen to and people to support for the families. But some of the young people find that even just engaging in that a real challenge. So I'm going to veer a little bit towards the social media element. Obviously, this got good things. I think all of us in the room, unless somebody would be brave enough to put their hand up to say that there are no social media. So social media ranges from, obviously, as we know, the LinkedIns, the X's, so I still think it's better as Twitter, Instagrams, etc. It does create that opportunity where the world becomes much smaller. You can see, rightly or wrongly, what Kim Kardashian had for breakfast this morning. You can see what the Australian Prime Minister said in Parliament, all while having a bagel at an event like this. That is where the internet and social media has its positives. You are widely connected. The problem is with that by doing that and being in that space, it can cause that isolation and anxiety, particularly amongst young people. Because going back to my original point, you are looking at it from the perspective of, oh, I'm not doing that, or I'm not there in that position. She had an amazing breakfast. I can't afford that, or I can't do that. And it's that constant comparison. I mean, Onside, who own the Unitas building and run the Unitas, and they do it around London, only recently last week released a report about a lot of their young people, and I've actually taken some of the stats from it for tonight. 76% of young people spend most of their free time on screens. Right? That was what came out of that report. Hear the tuts, and I appreciate that. Have you ever looked at your time management on your phones to how long you're on there? Sometimes before bed, I'm sure you're looking at your day ahead and the days you've had. You wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your phones. So whilst it's very easy to say, oh, young people, what are the examples that we are setting as leaders in the community or the adults in the space? I looked at it, that actually as part of that report, 44% of those young people felt and used the word lonely. All right? So whilst they are more connected to the world, they are not feeling as connected in person to those things. I'm conscious of time, Christine, I apologize for that. But we know that the challenge is to be able to communicate both online and in person in a positive way. And it can be a space for good. The platforms that are available allow you it's positive for things like activism. It's positive for things like bringing together unified causes, climate changes, mental health. There's a huge swathe of stuff going on across LinkedIn. Men talking about their mental health on LinkedIn, in a professional world. We're seeing women, in particularly on Instagram, talking about ADHD diagnoses, things that on both sides are unheard of in the current world, but is now gathering momentum for the good. Obviously, with the good, there is the negative, but I'm going to veer away from that because we know what the negative is, and we see that, unfortunately, in the world that we're in with faith, there is that, and going back to my very first point, there is that sameness versus uniqueness conversation. I think what we need to be doing is just trying our best when we're with those young people, we're in those spaces, to try and make sure that we are actively listening, not just nodding. When it comes to mental health, there's a big push. I was, lucky enough to be one of the authors of the Barnet Mental Health Charter, and I spoke to 300 young people who basically all said they just wanted people to listen. And I think that this is part of where we are now, that we have to appreciate that life is tough. I think I said to somebody earlier, I don't think I would know an easy way to navigate being 18 now. I don't think anybody in the room who is over the age of 18 would want to be back in that world where we are now, because there's so many positives, but there are so many things that a lot of pressures. And so what we can do, and the way I feel that oneness to drive back and to finish off my probably more than 8 minutes, I'm sorry, Christine, is that we can be that unifying force. We are those adults and safe people, safe places in the room. People go to church, synagogue, mosque. Why do they go? They go for faith, but they also go because they know it's a safe place for them to be. And actually, how do you activate that space for beyond that? And equally, how do you activate that space how do you activate a church for the Jewish community? How do you activate a mosque for the Christian community that want to go in? Because as soon as we start creating that division, the sooner the oneness element and that uniqueness starts becoming a bad thing. And for me, all about oneness is how we bring that uniqueness together. Is that okay for 8 minutes?
That's very good.
Thank you.
So if we work down the table, I'd like to move to Reverend Julie.
Thank you. In thinking about oneness, I've taken the risk this evening, I think, about dwelling quite specifically within my own tradition, within the Christian tradition, and hopefully using that as a way into being able to be honest about some of the challenges, but also to be maybe imaginative and hopeful about how we embrace them. And I think, starting with a very basic definition of oneness. Oneness is absolutely predicated on a unity or a coming together in some way of things that are different or separate. So oneness isn't, as you've touched on, about kind of uniformity or homogeneity. Within my own tradition, we talk about the oneness of God, of the love of God known in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that paradox of the love of God revealed, as Christians believe, in Jesus and the ongoing work of the Spirit. That we confess the oneness of God's ways with the world, from creation, from that coming together of men and women in difference, but needing a helpmate, through the way in which Jesus encountered young and old, men and women, foreigners, strangers, to listen and to respond to their need, whether that was about restoring right relationships, whether it was about compassion in need or in hunger, whether it was about telling stories that disrupted our status quo and opened up a different way of imagining a fairer world. And for Christians, the fact that Jesus died, was buried, rose again is the source of our hope, that sense that in the face of alienation and fragmentation and despair, God remains with us and restores life. And looking forward to the oneness of God's ways of the world, to the restoration of all things, a new creation, which has at its heart a tree for the healing of the nations. There's a sense of the confession of the oneness of the church. One church, one faith, one Lord is a hymn that many of us will have sung in our churches. The oneness of this body of Christ, which is complex. It's at the heart of our creed that we declare that the church is one, universal, Catholic, apostolic. But at the same time, we know there is the historic and present reality of tensions and disagreements and fragmentations where we have not been able to live well together. And alongside those things, also movements of the Spirit that draw us into a kind of a reparative work, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of the world. Those internal struggles within the life of the church, within our ecumenical work, those struggles that we face as people of faith and goodwill. But one of the things that stands at the heart of one of the Gospels, John's Gospel, is this extraordinary prayer that Jesus offers for his friends on the night of his betrayal and death. He prays this. He prays a prayer of protection and says to his friends, Holy Father, Protect them in your name that you have given me, that they may be one as we are one. So there is that kind of challenge within the tradition that I inhabit in prayer and in worship and in ministry of how do we live out that calling of oneness. And for me, part of that is recognising life together as a body, where we can't dispense with one or other part of it. Paul writes about the fact that the eye needs the ear, the foot needs the hand. There is that kind of interdependence and codependence of difference within the oneness of the body. That we are many members that become one through sharing one broken bread that is given and distributed for us. That Christians in our central act of worship will gather around one table, share one food for the sake of one world. If we take seriously that body language, I think within my tradition we do have to be increasingly self-reflective about what it is that we are communicating to the world. I've got no poker face. So kind of people will know what I'm thinking before I even utter a word. And sometimes the collective life of the church can be like that our voice in the public square can either be one that is trying to seek hope and healing and joy and wholeness and that reparative work. But sometimes on the social media platforms and in the public square, we can come across as anxious and fractious and divided and pursuing our own agendas rather than seeking to walk in that one way of love. We cannot escape over the last 7 days the real pain and pressure within the Church of England, my own denomination, of reading a report that highlights the very worst of a disunity when power and control and coercion displaces love. On Friday, I did nothing but walk as I began to try and process what was very much the mainstream media, of watching competing agendas, watching an archbishop take moral and personal responsibility for something where actually there were very many more people complicit. But in the midst of all of that, I come back to what is gifted to us in terms of life within the local and trying to be faithful in small things in the face of that pain and distress as we genuinely seek to be a safer church, which is everybody's responsibility. One of my friends, the theologian David Ford, writes this about John 17. He says, the desire of Jesus is for the intimacy and intensity of God's own life to be opened up for wholehearted, trusting participation through the ongoing drama of being loved and loving. And I offer you 3 images of what that might look like. Some of it, I think, is about our orientation of desires as human beings. To desire to be with and understand the other as God desires us. To think about our life at that very local level of our individual households and families and networks of friendship, which we rely on more and more in the face of that kind of epidemic of loneliness. Last year, I came to the end of a piece of work on the Archbishop's Commission on Families and Households, which culminated in a report called Love Matters, which focused not only valuing families and all their diversity, supporting relationships, honouring singleness, and empowering children and young people. But the 5th point of that report was that we should be seeking to build a kinder, fairer, and more forgiving society. And we can only do that by challenging discrimination, division, and deep inequality for the sake of every family and every household. And the final image I want to leave you with is something that Daniel and I were talking a little bit over coffee about some of the pressures of tribalism and tribal identities where we gather with people who are like us, who sound like us. And within my own tradition, we come together as members of the body of Christ through baptism. That somehow, in that sacramental act, we are caught up in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. and we kind of float in that water. And that means having to take our feet off the ground of some of those prior tribal loyalties to embrace something else. And when we do that, it might be a little bit more possible to be present with each other, genuinely present, listening to each other, curious about each other's stories and opinions and circumstances. And out of that place, beginning to reimagine a future and what might be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Jewish tradition has a long history of approaching deep theological issues and urgent practical issues through the telling of stories. So when I was thinking about oneness for tonight, I turned to a nearly 2,000-year-old text from the Mishnah to how the ancient rabbis thought about this idea of oneness. The discussion comes up in the context of the rabbis debating, how do you ensure that when you bring people to sit as witnesses giving testimony to a trial for capital cases, for cases where the punishment is the loss of a life, how do you ensure that people take seriously their responsibility to speak truly? And the story they turn to is from near the beginning of Genesis. They look at the story of Cain and Abel and the death of the first sibling. And they notice that in the Hebrew, the word where it says, the blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground, the Hebrew word for blood is plural. And the usual Hebrew word for blood is not plural. So this is something that catches their attention. And from this, they learn that the consequences of that murder spread far and wide. So far, so practical, so intimidatory. But they then go on to think even further back than Cain and Abel. They look all the way back to the creation of humanity in that very first chapter of Genesis. And they ask, why was Adam created as just one person, first of all? Why not start with the whole family? And they say, Adam was created alone to teach you that anyone who destroys a soul destroys an entire world. And anyone who saves a life saves an entire world. And also, so that they know that they share a common ancestor. But they haven't finished with the stories. They say another reason that Adam was created as just one person in the very beginning is to create peace among people. And then they wonder, what does that mean? How does this create peace among people? And it's in order to say that no person can claim, I have great ancestry and you came from some second rate. Because ultimately we all go back to that first person created by God in the image of God. We each of us go back to a shared ancestor who was made in the image of God. And then they bring another image to try to help us understand what this means. Because perhaps we share a common ancestor, but look around. We don't all look like each other. We are not all quite the same. And they bring the analogy of a stamp used for making coins. Now, some of you may have seen these. There's an impressive example in the Tower of London where you can see the huge machinery that's stamped down to make that impression on a coin to create it. And the rabbis notice that when a person has a stamp, they put each sheet of metal in and each coin comes out looking identical. But the amazingness of God is that God creates all human beings with the stamp of the image of God, and yet Not one of them is similar to another. And therefore, each person has that image of God in them. Each person can say, my ancestor is that first person. And each person can say, the world was created for my sake, because I go back to that first person. And if I am lost from this world, the whole world is lost. The rabbis tell it and make it sound very simple with the stories they tell and the images that they bring. I would simply ask us all tonight, how differently would we approach the world if we saw the image of God in each face that we encounter? If we understood that the differences that we are seeing are simply God's loving variety and letting that creation have many forms, and yet we were able to look through to see somebody who is a descendant of the first human being, somebody made in the image of God, and who is in themselves an entire world. This sense of oneness that yet contains difference. This is what I take from the Jewish ancient teachers to try to give me a way to say, we are one, but as you've already heard, we may not look the same, and that too is something to be celebrated. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to my former panelists. Actually, they helped me, to bring everything together. And in fact, I thought, probably the summary of my speech is about, the three cardinal principles of the Baha'i faith, which, as you know, is the youngest world religion established back in the middle of the 19th century. But I would like, which is the oneness of God, oneness of religion, and oneness of mankind, as you're all very familiar with. But I would like actually to dive a little bit deeper to explain, drawing inspiration from the Baha'i writings, primarily from Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, on what really is, why is it important oneness, and what does it mean, and, how can we achieve that? Please allow me, to quote, to begin with, from Baha'u'llah, who says, "Do you know why we created you all from the same dust? That no one should exalt himself over the other. That no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your hearts how you were created. Since we have created you all from the same substance, it is incumbent upon you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land. That from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest." In another quote, he says, "You are all leaves of one tree and the fruits of one branch." Abdul Wahab, the son of Baha'u'llah, explains further, "By this it is meant that the world of humanity is like a tree. The nations are the different limbs and branches of this tree, and that individual human creatures are the fruits and the blossoms thereof." In this way, Baha'u'llah expressed the oneness of mankind, whereas in all religions in the past, we have had this, us and them, whereas, the people of the book were on one side of the pure tree, and the others the people of infidelity and error, or the evil tree. The former were considered as belonging to the faithful, whereas the others are to the hosts of the irreligious and infidel. On one part of humanity being the recipients of the divine mercy, and the other the object of the wrath of the Creator. Baha'u'llah removed all this by proclaiming that the oneness of the world of humanity. And I think this is something which also we would be challenging really our own inherited beliefs and behaviors. So against this backdrop of all-embracing vision of our common heritage, we find today that we're really dealing with an unprecedented crisis of identity, which is amplified by what was mentioned before, in terms of, the social media, but also, the total social, political, and financial differences which the society is witnessing. Baha'u'llah says the winds of despair, he said 130 years ago, are alas blowing from every direction, and the strife that divides and afflicts the human race is daily increasing. The signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned, inasmuch as the prevailing order appears to be lamentably defective. This prophetic judgment is being amply confirmed by what we have seen in the history, by the two world wars, but also by our common daily experience of how humanity is struggling in different ways. At the time, and with the at the same time, we see also the advancement of the technology in science and communication has brought the humanity together. So we've never been in a better place to really face the challenges and the threats facing the humanity. But what is needed is that kind of unifying vision and direction to address them. But where is that unifying vision is supposed to come from? Religion, Baha'u'llah says, is the chief instrument for the establishment of order in the world and of tranquility amongst its peoples. It is not the object of every revelation, he says, to affect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life and external conditions. Now, the teachings that successive manifestations of God, similar to the teachers of the various classes of one school, revealed to humanity, are endowed with such potency as it can instill new life into every human frame. Once accepted, these teachings can overturn old patterns of thought and contribute to new understanding of the deepest level of faith and belief. But belief must be also put into action to bring change about. But doesn't our experience contradict with what we have seen throughout the history in terms of how religion can also be divisive? Now, Baha'u'llah says, if religion becomes a cause of dislike, hatred, and division, it would be better to be without it. And to withdraw from such a religion would be a truly religious act. It's very provocative, but at the same time, it's something we need to think about. Any religion which is not a cause of love and unity is not a religion. So how do the Baha'i envision oneness to happen? The Baha'i writings further emphasize, let there be no mistake. The principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot around which all the teachings of Baha'u'llah, but also other religions revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. It implies an organic change in the structure of the present-day society, a change such as the world has not yet witnessed. And we believe that its political machinery, its spiritual aspiration, its trade and finance, everything is being affected. And yet infinitely, it is in the diversity of the national characteristics and the people it embraces. In a peace message to the world readers in 1985, the world governing body of the Baha'i Faith writes, where the peace is to be reached only through unimaginable horrors precipitated by humanity's stubborn clinging to old patterns of behavior, or is to be embraced now by an act of consultative will, is the choice before all who inhabit the earth. So for the Baha'is, the change starts at the individual level. The small and daily steps taken by every member of the society, which bear a much larger impact than any grand manifesto or ambitious political agenda driven by thirst for power, dominance, and privilege of few over the masses. In my simple mind, the first step is to introduce spirituality and humanity into every aspect of our life. For Baha'is, it means to raise the devotional character of the community and bond in service to mankind through social action. For me, there are two ways of working together to this goal. First, internally, which means working to learn more, meditate more, purify my life, and becoming more spiritual each day. Second, externally, which means offering whatever I have learned or gained to contribute in all my lives to activities to the advancement of the civilization and the oneness. In this way, individual way, I play my part. I'd like to close my presentation with following promise from Baha'u'llah, recounted by Professor Edward G. Brown of Cambridge University, who met Baha'u'llah in Accra in April 1890. Praise be to God that thou hast attained. Thou hast come to see a prisoner and an exile. We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of man should be strengthened, that disunity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for leaving me absolutely last at the table. Feeling inspired. I suppose I'm the one person to kind of look at this through an organizational lens. Christina's question to me, as an organization, briefly, what do you do? How do you embrace differences and coming together to bring peace and celebrate oneness? I think in many ways, there's a personal story about how you find yourself at an organization. And I think I'm going to go right back to the beginning. As you can hear, I speak with a slightly different slang or tone in my voice. And I grew up in a place which in many ways deeply rooted in British values and culture. I mean, you just have to look around South Africa and know, in many ways we were a colonial country. The buildings have a Victorian sense to them, and our passion for rugby and cricket and football come from a certain place. I also grew up at a time when apartheid, you could say, was nearing, but I think it was there was major friction. Young people were growing up in a society that there was no oneness. My father was involved in the non-racial sports movement. I remember in my early years going into the townships, but I never really got it or understood it. We were a fractured, broken society. I think in many ways what made it worse was that I grew up as a traditional Orthodox Jew. I went to the one Jewish day school. We were only taught Orthodox Jewry in the school, and we were taught around a certain country in the world in a specific lens. I was looking into a mirror, and the mirror was looking back at me. And at no stage did any teacher say to me, just open the window and look out, because there is a real world. I grew up, I might have believed that there was a sense of oneness and unity, but in fact, those things later in life would be shattered. I remember in 1998 going to university. This was 4 years after the end of apartheid. University of Cape Town was essentially still a white university. I was still surrounded by white students. I was living a very middle-class white life. I got married, had a child, and my world changed because I realized that what became important to me was when I looked at my daughter, what world did I want her to grow up in? And so I started a football club in an old middle-class white community that his vision was about bringing kids from all over the city to play sport. But it wasn't about the football. It was about to learn from one another, to understand one another. That got me into politics. I then worked in the local council for nearly a decade of my life. In a uni city of 231 councillors, I was a proportional representative councillor, and I was allocated into traditional African township boards, or what we call coloured townships. And I saw at the root a broken country. And it doesn't matter how many Rugby World Cups you win and how you say stronger together, but a victory of 10 minutes doesn't bring a community together. And there are things that are required to be put in place by councils, by faith communities, to bring society together. Because the truth is, we all live in our lagers. The Jewish community does, in many ways, live a very insular existence. We live behind high walls and fences. For many, they understand why, but for many, they don't. At the age of 39, I left politics to join the Board of Deputies, very similar like the Board of Deputies here, the British Board of Deputies. But in South Africa, it was only civil and human rights for the Jewish community. That's all we fought for. I was given the privilege of going on a trip to the United States as part of the Schusterman Foundation. And I remember quite clearly that I walked into the first sitting, and Jews of color, transgender rabbis for other denominations walked in the room. And I said to my wife, because she phoned me, she goes, "How was the first night?" I said it was as if somebody had taken a chandelier and smashed it in front of me. My whole vision of this white Ashkenazi, which is a Jew from Eastern Europe, of Lithuanian descent, was gone. This viewpoint that my own community was what I thought it was had disappeared. I was lost and alone and realized quite quickly that I needed to toughen up and start to learn not only about my own community, because in Cape Town there were 12,500 Jews. 11,000 were traditionally Orthodox or strongly Orthodox. The balance were progressive. When I moved to the United Kingdom, the one thing that I'm so deeply proud about is you get Masorti, you get liberal, you get progressive, you get modern Orthodox, you get Haredi, you get Chabad. Everybody is allowed a space as one community to still be different ways to practice to your one God. One community, one God in different ways. Still oneness. But I needed something to take me on a path to learn about other people, other ways of lives, other religions. And this is the greatest challenge in the worlds that we live in, is that we find it's easier to be friends with somebody that's similar to us, and has hopefully supports Manchester United, and we don't have to have arguments. And so when I met Laura Marx, I was very blessed to find mitzvah. Because people always say to me, well, what's the mitzvah? So I get different responses to this. And in the root cause, the oldest thing is that a mitzvah is a commandment. There are 613 commandments. Go count your pomegranate pips if you want to. The rabbi's next to me. But mitzvah, they took it and translated it into, it's a day of kindness and a good deed. And so in shifting from commandment to good deed, I think the one thing that in the Aramaic and the Hebrew and at the root of the word that was missed, and Julie is a trustee and I'm sitting here going, we never talk about it, is actually what the root says, which is connection. There is a desperate need in society, whether you're, I saw Sarah at the back, whether it's Nisan Hashem, a Jewish Muslim women's group, or Mitzvah Day, or any other WIN, a women's interfaith network, or BON, that offers the opportunity for people to find a space, to come together, to sit sometimes through productive discomfort, not to fight or flight, but to sit there with friends, with respect, with dignity, and with hope, to learn about the other, because it's so easy to other. The world needs places where we can connect. And I will say this, and I know it's been recorded, so but I'm not going to toe a party line, and I think I'll say it. There is no two ways that October 7th has challenged both the fabric of the Jewish and Muslim community. And within it are people who don't see black and white, who see the nuance and the grey, and can talk about both sides, and the pain and the suffering. Today in Norwich, the priest said, we should find each other in peace, because when we find each other in peace, we can build the friendships that take us through the hardship. And so at the root of Mitzvah Day, this day when we go out with our neighbors to do, whether it's sadaqah or sewa or kindness or mitzvah, it is at that root is to connect through goodness, to find each other's core humanity, that we do care about each other, that in truth we do love each other. Because I tell my children this all the time. Dad doesn't do InterFaith when he comes to Barnet or Brighton or wherever I go. I do InterFaith every day. You do it when you're in your workplace. You do it when you're at school. You do it on the bus. And quite frankly, you're doing it even when you're buying your groceries. To be kind and respectful and to find each other and connect is probably one of the most special gifts. So for me, through the difficulties, which is always arranging the day, and I apologize, I was on a call about Mitzvah Day, which is next week, is that I have the greatest joy when I see the Sikh and the Muslim and the Jew sitting in a garden planting bulbs talking about their grandchildren. Or when they're packing shelves in a food bank, they are finding each other. The biggest problem I have is it shouldn't be finding each other on one day, on the third Sunday, this year on the fourth Sunday in November. The challenge we have to take home, which is when we light a candle. Did anybody see where the grey parcel was that was sitting on a chair over there? Sorry. Will, did you see it? Yeah. And this is Mitzvah Day in action. So the keys, don't give the keys away, I'm not getting it. Thank you. Diana, that's your parcel. Thank you, pleasure. Have a wonderful. That should be enough. Have a good Mitzvah Day. Cheers. I'll never. That's the ritual. Take Mitzvah Day. The challenge that we have is how do people of InterFaith and Multi Faith take what we do in this room and be the light bearers and light the candle to welcome somebody in and to keep the work going. And that's my challenge, not only to myself and those sitting with me, but it's my challenge to you. When you go home, when you're at uni or at school or in council or in the mosque or in the temple, or when you're having a conversation, are you brave enough to call out the person that says something that is I'm not going to use the word, but says something? Are you going to bring somebody with you to an event to get a taste of it? Or are you just going to go, I'm not willing to do this because it's got to. We need people who are brave enough. Otherwise, the world for my children and their children is going to still be the world we're living in now, where we are separated. I'm getting the, okay, and apart. So.
Everybody. I've been tapping away with words, and what I think is interesting is I've just been noticing little words that popped out for me. So bringing society together, learn of others, good deed, connection, every day, connected through goodness, advancement, community, change, love and unity, but also disruption, pain, oneness of people and God, first person, whole world. Kind of different phrases that show actually how different faiths come together, and they come together through people, and the way in which we all interrelate. So what I wanted to do was, obviously we've got a small panel here, but there's all of you out there in the room, and so I wanted to bring you in and see from some other perspectives whether there were any questions you had or something you'd like to add. I mean, from those of you here, we have Muslim, we have Hindu, we have other representatives. If you've got any questions or if you've got anything that you'd like to bring in from your perspective, please do. Oh.
Nice.
Yeah. Is there anything anybody would like to ask or add or bring in?
Actually, I have a question more for Neil. So I recently read a book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. So what you say is about the more connected they are, the more isolated they feel. And you also mentioned about how good the social media can be, and there's the negative aspects of it. So how do we use this the space in the virtual world for these young people to also want to be safe, and yet at the same time bring them together in a way that we can bring them out from the virtual world into the maybe real world?
I think the person that works that out well is going to be a multi-billionaire. I think that the challenges that we've got with social media is that it's, to a greater or lesser extent, it's very hard to keep track of all the stuff that's out there. Facebook and Instagram, etc., are constantly being checked and assessed on their ability to take down hate and to keep up stuff. But then you hear, things like Elon Musk being very happy to allow for things, whether they might be fake or not, to stay online. So we can't. So my point is, we can't rely on the organisations that run them themselves to be those safeguards. We have to, in our communities, be those safeguards. Social media, the internet is here to stay. It is only going to be more advanced. We can only look at the way the world is now with AI.
Yeah.
That actually, again, AI can be used for such amazing, wonderful things. Not necessarily creating a human person, because I've seen some of those images. But fundamentally, they can be used for good. The difficulty is bringing a young person along. So I think, first of all, it's taking interest, in my mind. Taking interest in that young person's world. Not just to, oh, I want to see who you're talking to, I want to see what you're saying. Obviously, as a parent or a grown-up or a safe person in that space, but take an interest in that world. Be connected to them in the real world for when they are in the virtual world. There are things. So, for example, my sons love the world of Minecraft and Roblox. For anybody who has no idea what those are, you are living in a lovely world. That is my world. I live in at home. And I sit there and I watch them play. I see what they're doing. I talk to them about it after it. So as the panel has sort of talked about connection and oneness, etc., it's finding that safe space to have those nice conversations, and also, those spaces, I think, that they were saying at the end about the ability to challenge. A lot of misinformation is online. We only have to go onto Facebook and Instagram to see stories, images that are incorrect. There's no other way of putting it. It's not correct. But if that's what they're being seen, that's what's being seen. So we have to find a way of going, well, Facebook says this. How do we look and see what is the other side? Because there's always another side, but there's a lot of families out there, and you're speaking to someone, Stuart was saying where he came from. I grew up in Northern Ireland, which is not exactly known for oneness either. And I grew up during a time where the Troubles had just simmered down, but there was still a lot of fighting going on. And for me, it was never really talked about of how to unite. It was all about the separation. And what we need to be brave enough to do is be in those spaces to be able to say, right, well, it might differ from my view. We've had this with influencers like Andrew Tate and the perception of women and how a man should be, etc., and young boys should be, how they should treat others and how they should treat women. And I think the challenge with us for young people is our automatic reaction is protection and going, no, stay away from that. It's disgusting, horrible behavior. But I think anybody in the room who knows a young person, as soon as you do that, they're going to go gravitate more towards it generally. Because they don't understand. They don't understand the nuances. They don't have the life experience to be able to make them understand why it's dangerous. So, but coming at it from as we would do in the faith community here, that would say, okay, tell me about your view, and then let me portray a different viewpoint with examples, with backing up, with different texts, etc. Because the more engaged you are with them in the real world, the more the online world will be a safer space. Because, and I'm not going to go into the technicalities of algorithms, but as soon as they start looking for the good, more good will turn up. As soon as they start looking down the bad will turn up. And I think when everybody was speaking, just to tag on and in, I think one of my favorite quotes that somebody said to me ages ago was, "You are unique just like everybody else." Mm-hmm. And I think that's where this idea of oneness and connection comes from. And that's what we've got to drive into our young people, that it's okay to be different because everybody else is. Mm. So that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. So, if there aren't any other questions with this, there are. Mona, please.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you very much to the panel. Looking at you from this side of the table, from your really diverse backgrounds, you've demonstrated oneness perfectly, because it's amazing. All of you said things that I certainly can resonate with. And because I come from a Muslim background, everything resonates, but particularly what the rabbi said, because she quoted verbatim something that is an Islamic teaching. Because we are also taught that we are one ummah, one community. And when you save the life of one person, you're saving the whole of that community. And when you kill somebody, you are killing the whole of that community. So it really did resonate with me. And the question that I have for the panel is, when you see people from your communities doing just that, how do you react to that? Because if someone from my community does that, I feel very betrayed, because I know that they're going against the teachings of my faith. So how do you feel? I ask each of you, maybe. Thank you. I think this should be you
It's not the Northern Irish person.
Yeah.
You've got a South African, right.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a hard question, and there's no doubt about it. I think that, and again, if I go from the young person perspective and I look at it from the social media perspective, it is very easy to see hate. It's everywhere. I just have to go online and I see a picture of, and if we're going to use, as an example, the current conflict and whatnot in the Middle East, people throwing out abuse at people for having an Israel flag, Palestine flag, people who have, we just have to look at things with Trump and, talking about this, that, and the other. And I think that, obviously not from a faith necessarily perspective, from a human perspective, I think it's just, and going back to exactly what Stuart said, it's just having that bravery to challenge those perspectives, even if it comes from within your safe space of community. Because it's all well and good that, and I'm sure, we've got different congregations and people who sit there in the room. It's very easy to, I talked about sameness. It's very easy to sit there and go, well, we all must agree with this, that from a Muslim point of view, we must be like this, and from a Jewish point of view, we must look at things like that, or Baha'i. We have to challenge that. That the religion is a gateway, it's a line that we need to go down in terms of how we live our daily lives, but it is not something that we literally hit somebody else over the head with to say you're not the same and you're not looking the same way. We are in a world now, thankfully, where there are people who will see wars and side with one another rather than taking sides. But it's the people on those peripheries of the minds that we've got to change. So I find that, again, coming from Northern Ireland, very challenging. It's still going on, as I know it is in a lot of conflict places that have had conflict in them. But from a young person's perspective, I think it's just going back to that point that I said about bravery and making sure that we are happy to challenge, and again, Stuart iterated that as well. That would be my perspective.
Maybe I'll follow South African opinion, because there's a word Ubuntu, which I didn't want to get wrong, is I am what I am because of who we all are. And I think we need to stop saying, well, as a Jew and as a Muslim, as a Christian, whatever, this kind of thing of a loss of life is a loss of life. That we can't be brave enough to see it what it is, live within those grays and say that isn't right. That is not something I would celebrate on either side. And that for me is the challenge, is that I think often we are asked to call out our own communities first and not somebody else. And I actually sometimes think we should be calling each other out. So when someone says something that's actually just not okay, we should be saying, that's not okay, I don't like that, and I don't think that's fair. But I also at the same time understand the pressures that come with inside community of possibly saying something and being brave to say it, and then actually facing isolation or alienation or becoming a leper. And in many ways, inside faith, it's already hard enough to do interfaith. And I'm going to be brutal. People always say to me, whether I'm in Brighton or Manchester or London, the word Meshuggah, crazy. Or you're Meshuggah, why are you doing this? Stick inside the gates, take care of your own, get on with life. But I can't see how the world continues. How do we fix it? So for me, I hope that I'm brave enough to call out and push people to kind of debate things and trying to say, take that word out and put that word in, and would you still feel the same way? Because often when we're stuck seeing it only through our lens, we struggle to call it out. So my challenge to everybody is we all need to call out all of it, our own communities and others, if we're going to fix it.
So I would add to that I find the mention of algorithms actually really helpful. Sorry. Yes, the calling out, absolutely. But I think some of the things that we're also not always good about is uplifting the good that's done. It's really easy to get stuck in the shame that we feel when somebody who is identifying in some way with us does something that we wish wasn't being done. And we forget sometimes actually to uplift and to amplify the good that's being done. And if we forget about that good, then the algorithms are just going to bring more and more that brings us down. So to go alongside this calling out, I also want a calling up of the good that actually is, again, if the religion isn't bringing us to good, to love, to better, what are we here for? So I'd love to add that as well.
Sorry, Jude, before I come in, I will add that one of the biggest challenges that we see at the Mitzvah, we're a day about goodness. Yet the press and the media don't want to talk about goodness. So in many ways, I think Sky last year came down to our project at JW3 because they were expecting people to be fighting. I think that's what they wanted to see. Instead, actually, the people got along and did the day. So I think for me, it's whose role is it to put pressure on the media, or do we start using our own internal media to drive a narrative that actually good exists? So just a thought, like, how do we get those stories out there when the press and those algorithms are stacked against you?
I think it comes to point the power of people is much stronger than powerful people. And I think where this multi forum comes into play, that we are bringing people together. So more people can come into this forum, and collectively we can challenge the faith in our politics. Like we're trying to use their financial power, the political authority, to alienate one from another.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Julie.
Yeah, Julie.
I think I don't want to kind of replicate what my colleagues have said, because there is much that I both feel and think that's absolutely in common. And I think sometimes we need space for lament that just allows us to acknowledge the hurt and the pain of it. And I guess within each of our traditions, there are practices that are similar, that allow, those real cries from the heart about what is grieving us, about particular situations, and whether that's kind of the external pressures or whether it's the need to call things out within our own communities. And those things are difficult in very particular ways. But I think there is sometimes also the need of an active choice to take the risk of continuing friendships. And I can think of a conversation, a Zoom call that was being recorded as a teaching thing with one of my colleagues who we were on very different wings of the C of E in terms of women's authority and leadership, in terms of questions of sexuality, what the future of the church is going to look like. And he asked me a really stark question. He was like, well, we disagree on so many particular things, Julie. What place do you see for me in the church? I was like, you're my friend. I can't do this stuff without you. And there is far more that we have in common, not just in terms of a framework or fundamental tenets of our faith within which we think differently about certain kind of moral or ethical positions, but a love of Aristotle, a love of Jarvis Cocker. It's kind of finding those surprising bits of common ground and taking the risk of staying with that, and recognising there are limits as to what I can change and influence. I'm not sitting, as many of my friends and colleagues here are, in the chamber of our town hall, which is a very particular sphere of debate and influence and responsibility, and also friendships. I'm not in the Houses of Parliament. I'm not in the United Nations. I just happened to be entrusted with a little bit of stability and people and place here in Hendon, and acknowledging, as the raising up of the good that we can do within that. So I think that kind of that both end of place for lament, place for how we call things out in a spirit of friendship, where we can seek something that is just and merciful, and hopefully glimmers of joy within that that can restore a little bit of hope in our shared humanity. And I think that's one of the things that I felt really quite emotional tonight in hearing from my colleagues. And I think that kind of rawness and honesty of speaking out of different contexts and traditions, but longing for that same thing, knowing that we're all bearing the weight of how global events affect us. We're all bearing the weight of a real love for our community. And I think just having that space to really attend to those points of connection. So kind of lament that maybe hopefully leads us to something more joyful in friendships.
I was just thinking, maybe there's another angle which we can a little bit shed light on the question you raised, and I think it's about the judgment or judgmental thinking. And I was thinking about a beautiful quote from Baha'u'llah. I'm just paraphrasing. It says, bring yourself into account each day before you're being called to respond. And I think that's something I think we should need to think about, and to really teach the youth and the children, in fact. Of course, in everything we do, there is a consequence, either way. And that's left, to the institutions. And I think this is really inherent in all the faith, that we need also to be mindful of what we do and what kind of consequences we have. But I think at the same time is about, me as a person looking at, my own shortcoming and not necessarily seeing, what others are doing wrong. Because I think that also creates that kind of me and you, if you start to think that way. And I think to be mindful that, we all make mistakes, that everything, nobody knows anybody's situation than the person itself, So from that perspective, that may also help, to see things in a context, but also allow, the society, of course, take action or, whatever might be appropriate. But at the same time, me as a person, I'm not allowed, to make any judgment on the persons, because that ultimately is where, you start actually to see us and them and, create this dichotomy of, right or wrong and all that. And I think that may be also something to be mindful of.
Thank you. To comment on that, that's okay. Just to say that I absolutely agree with what you're saying, because to judge someone is not our place to do that. So we know that's not our place. So to accept accept the uniqueness that Neil's talked about is absolutely part of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just check? Will, are we okay time-wise?
I think we're all right by the time 9.
Okay, so I'm just mindful of that we're at 3 minutes.
I don't think we're going to be kicked out.
Yes.
I think the word community is very, how you define each and everybody, that's very important. The minute you think our community is a religious community, you will never step out. The minute you think that, for example, in London now, we are so lucky to have different faiths here. So our community should be our neighborhood, an extended neighborhood. And there we have everybody of people of different religions and different cultures, even. Because I meet so many Jewish people who are from all over the world, Sephardi Jew maybe coming from Eastern Europe, or somebody coming from Iraq or Iran. Their cuisine and their stories are so different. But that makes our community. So we need to really widen the word community to our, I think, in our favor.
Yeah, thank you very much. You've taken the word out of my mind.
Oh, no.
I was going to say that, that the heart of this is community doesn't happen, it's built. It's kind of community is effort. But actually, community should be shared joy, happiness, kind of the positive things. And one of the things I think that Neil kind of touched on with algorithm is my feeling is that it is so easy to be negative these days. We are surrounded, and the algorithms, the media, these things all seem to amplify the negative. Even reviews, amplify the negative. And actually, in terms of advancement and development and learning and togetherness, it's kind of amplifying the joy and love and togetherness and happiness. And, if we look at the words that came out at the beginning, so the first word I put down from Neil's was loneliness. Kind of that idea that community can bring people together, but community isn't just like people. Community is something that can be shared broader, and you find the thing that's the connection. And so I think it's the right word, because community is so broad. And so I think that is a powerful thing to kind of sort of finish with.
And I think there's a sense of bringing things down to that real granular level where every word, every conversation, every gesture has potential and meaning and purpose. Whether it's saying thank you as you get onto a bus. And I think all those things that we kind of lost in the midst of lockdown, of those kind of moments of physical proximity and contact, whether it's a smile in the street, how we address people, all of those things do have a cumulative effect of just undercutting that isolation. And I guess alongside the networks of our individual households, we all need those low threshold places where we can come together without having to pay £5 for a macchiato or something. And I guess we all have leverage in shaping that in our different roles and responsibilities. But every word makes a difference.
Thank you.
Just I guess a granular, practical kind of community thing. There is a group that has formed following the unrest in August, who are making community quilts, and it's very much anyone who wants to join in can join in. Really happy that Barnet Libraries have said that we can have their spaces. There are people who have volunteered to facilitate things. You can make a patch at home. You can come together in your own communities to make a patch. I know New Citizen Gateway have done some sessions in other places, but if anyone wants to know, it's Community Quilt Barnet is the website, and they're on Insta and Facebook.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to bring in community as well, which is also from something that Christina's been working on. So on the 7th of December at St James's School, just down the road from here really, there's going to be a community Christmas carol event, and the aim of it is to be inclusive and is to be a true community event with all welcome to participate, join and celebrate together. So there's some leaflets knocking about. Help yourself to one, put the date in your diary, and hopefully you'll be able to make it. Because I think the great thing about community is that there's richness there. There's kind of a richness of being and building a togetherness. And so I think the more that we can do things together and the more we can be understanding, the better. So thank you very much.
So can I just add one thing, is that I feel when we talk about oneness, when we talk about community, I think we should start from ourselves and with our neighbours. And the thing is that how many of us actually know our neighbours on our street now? So I think if we want to talk about bring people together, cohesion and stuff like that, about oneness, then let's start on our own street.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, years ago, doors were always open. Now doors are always closed, apart from those that are sharing something, but doors are closed, blinds are shut. People used to be in and out of each other's homes. My grandparents were kind of in their 20s and 30s. So that's brilliant. So what I'd like to do, we've not got long left, but we've got bagels. We've got some more tea and coffee, and we've got a chance to just share a little bit more and do a bit of networking, a chance to quiz a little bit more on a one-to-one basis, and sort of just develop some of these thoughts. And thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much all for your words. Thank you very much everybody for being here.